I'm calling to order the work session for Monday, October 13, 2025. The first item on the agenda is public comment on agenda items. If you're here from the public and wish to speak to something that's on our agenda, now's your chance. Seeing none, we'll move on to the Kent County Drain Commissioner's presentation. Ken Yonker and Joel Morgan.
Yeah.
Glad to have you here.
It's up there. Yeah. All right. I'm going to come in there. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Ken Yonker, the Kent County Drain Commissioner, and we're here to give you a little education on what the drain code is and very basic. And then Joel will give you a report on a project that will, that's a big part of it's in Wyoming, is the Behan and Foley drain. So we'll start with what we do. So the drain office, and I personally as drain commissioner am held accountable to the Public Act 40 of 1956, which is also known as the drain code. And that really lays out what my responsibilities are, what I'm supposed to do, and how I'm supposed to do it. We're also operate under Part 307 of the Michigan NREPA, which delegates authority to the Drain Commission through the county commissioners on all the lake levels that we have in Kent County. Then we are also review the Land Division Act, the Mobile Home Act, Site Condo Act. When there's developments that pertain to them, we have to review the drainage on those. And then we have the NPDES and MS4 permit requirements and inspection and maintenance for water quality features. And that's all regulated through EGLE. So our drain infrastructure in Kent County, we have over 650 drains. We have about 400 miles of open channel, which are drains, ditches, creeks, and there's some pipe. We have 389 detention basins, 18 dams, which also gives us legal lake levels. And then the first drains, just a historical thing, were first dug in the 1820. And at that time, the settlers, of course, they're no different than we are today. Nobody wants to participate to clean the drain that's down below as long as they're not flooding. But the settlers put together the drain code, which they had rules that they agreed to operate by at that time before we were a state. By the time we became a state, then those have been set and they all agreed to operate by those. So when we became a state within the first 3 years, those were codified. And those are what we call the drain code today. Still operate by most of the same laws. So the county is broke up into drain districts. And the drain districts are determined based on flow of the land. So your higher elevations all flow down to a lower elevation, which then is the county drain that moves the water out. That's how we manage that runoff water. So those contours are, the whole country is been mapped out with contours with the technology of today. So all our districts are determined by contour. And then there's that area that sheds water into a waterway or a county drain. Most of the time it's a stream or a river. Then that becomes the drain district. So it's within that drain district that assessments are applied when there's maintenance done on a drain. And then those properties, those parcels in that district are assessed, and the cost is broke up over the parcels in that district. My role in that is every district is a corporation. It's an actual legal corporation under law. It can sue, it can be sued, it can buy property, and it can sell property. My role is I'm the facilitator. I'm the word for operating that corporation. All decisions have to flow through me as a drain commissioner. That's the legal authority that I carry and the legal responsibility that I carry. So as I said before, the assessments then are applied to that corporation and everybody in that corporation. So the public roads are also assessed as a separate entity, MDOT county roads, and that's through a 14A calculation that is determined. And I'm not going into that. If you want to know what that is, Joel can go through that with you. Do we have an at-large benefit? And that's where the public entities play a role. So if you're a township, you get what Kent County has done in the past historically, and is most of the counties in the state, we assess the at-large at 20%. So township cities get 20% of the cost of a project. If there's two townships in a district, different ones, they'll each get half of that. But the set at large is 20% as a rule of thumb. And then there's supplemental benefit. If somebody wants some extra work done, then they'll get assessed or billed directly for that supplemental. And then what's left after that, it goes to the property owners. So a project is started through a petition process. And that when we get a petition, it usually becomes it'd be like a capital improvement is when we get those kinds of projects, and they come at us from a petition. So a petition is either signed by 5 property owners, can trigger a petition. A municipality can trigger a petition or file a petition. The road commission can file a petition. And that's the 3 ways we can get petitioned to look at a project. Once we receive that petition, we're required by law to put together a board of determination. And that's where I get 3 people outside of that district to come in as a panel and listen to what the project is being proposed, And then the property owners are all notified, and they can come and they can talk positive or negative toward that project that's being proposed. That panel listens to that, and at the end of that meeting, they have to decide whether it's necessary or not. And they have to follow the guidelines. So if they say yes, the project is necessary, then they give me an order, a written order to proceed. That becomes law. Then there's 10 days of appeal. If somebody doesn't like it, they can go to circuit court and appeal it. If it's not appealed in 10 days, it's done. I can't stop it. The court can't stop it. It will be done. So that's when we get into angry people, because not many people pay attention when we send notices. And that's the only time they have a voice under the drain code. So after that determination is made, then we hire an engineering firm to take a look at the scope of the project and give us a recommendation what has to be done. And then we proceed to put a bid package together and put it out for bid. And when the work when we got the final numbers, the people are notified what their assessment will be. And then my role is to assess that to the properties and the formula that I explained to you earlier. And that's why this position is elected, because I do the assessment. Under Constitution, in order to assess people, you have to be in an elected position. So that's why drain commissioner is elected. So Joel's going to give you an update as to the Behan Foley, and when he's done, we'll take any questions.
Thank you, everybody. It's fun to be here because I'm a City of Wyoming resident. And I just want you to know the Burlingame project is going really well from my perspective. If you've taken calls and people are pissed, I don't care. It's a great project. So, all right, the Behan and Foley is a creek system. It has been under our jurisdiction since 1903. The watershed for the Behan and Foley drain is just over 3 square miles. On the east, the watershed goes just east of Byron Center Avenue. On the north, we're bounded by Buck Creek, north of 44th Street. And then on the west, the watershed goes about halfway between Ivan Rest and Wilson, the Maple Hills Golf Course area. That all drains down into the Behan and Foley. It's just over 3 miles in length. Our rights of way were deeded to us in 1903. So the drain has been a legal corporation, a municipal corporation for over 100 years. And we routinely do maintenance on this drain. So we get a lot of calls for downed trees, erosion, things of that nature. It just so happens that the very lower end of this drain, everything drains from south to north, goes under 52nd through the Res Life property, under 44th Street, through the Ramblewood Apartments, and then ultimately into Buck Creek. The lower end of this drain, you can see in that top left picture, is an inline pond constructed around the same time as those neighborhoods. And every stream passes water and it passes sand. And people don't really think about streams passing sand, but a healthy stream always passes sand. And when you have an inline pond, that is a place where sand drops out. And so over the years, a rather large delta has formed within that pond. We have dredged that delta twice in the last 4 years or so. We've removed hundreds of yards of dirt, and each time it keeps filling back in. And so we don't want to keep throwing money after a project that's going to not do what we want it to do. So we ended up inspecting most of the drain, and there is considerable erosion throughout the drain. Downstream of culverts that are undersized, we have massive scour holes. We have bends that are blowing out. The drain itself, or the watershed of the drain rather, is extremely paved. There's a high degree of pavement with a low amount of stormwater management. A lot of the homes, especially on the east side of the drain along 44th, right in the Byron Center area, those are 1960s era neighborhoods. And you didn't design neighborhoods in the 60s with any sort of stormwater management. My parents live in this watershed. I grew up in this watershed, and our home sit on top of a hill right at the corner of Caspian and Chassell. And you go down Chassell, and it's a big steep hill. And at the bottom of that, it's a 30 or 36 inch pipe that picks up the water and carries it right into the drain. And so when you have undetained water from a highly impervious watershed, you have a very flashy flow. And so there's a high degree of erosion in here. There's a lot of deadfall. So as our banks migrate outward, our trees are undercut, they fall in. So a lot of issues on the drain. We were petitioned 2024. We held our board of determination that was hosted at the Granville Public Library. We had 150, 200 people there. Yeah. It was very well attended. And there was much support for a project to improve this water course. I'll highlight earlier this year, we had about a 3-inch rain back in end of March, beginning of April, and we got a call from Ramblewood, and crossing under Turtle Bend Drive catastrophically failed. And so we were able to procure a 12x7 concrete box culvert within relatively short order. There was a contractor in Midland who had bought too much, and so we were able to get it at a really good price this year. So as I said, there is quite a bit of erosion along this drain. The worst of it is north of 44th Street. If you're driving westbound on 44th from Kent Trails or from Byron Center, and you look off to your right, there's that emergency building there. Well, the drain comes under the road and takes this hard 90 back to the east, and then a hard 90 going to the north. And forever, there's been concrete slabs, and those concrete slabs are sloughing and falling. And there's just too much water, and it's eroding sediment. It's filling ponds. We have obstructions. And all of that exceeds what we're statutorily allowed to do under the maintenance provisions in the state law. So the state law says that we can spend up to $10,000 per year per mile of drain without any sort of municipal approval, without any sort of petition process. This is the putting air in your tires, changing your oil type basic maintenance activities. But once we exceed that statutory limit, we're required to either get municipal approval or a petition. In this case, 5 property owners submitted a petition to our office. We hired Fishbeck. They've completed topographic survey inspection of the entire drain. We've got a hydraulic and hydrologic model of the watershed and the water course. And we do that because if we propose a solution, we want to make sure that it's going to do what we expect it to do. We've secured most of the easements along the project. We still have to reach out to both Res Life and Ramblewood Apartments to get additional easements on some of the solutions that we want. We've completed preliminary design on the project. A lot of the improvements are just simple stream best management practices. So log revetments, brush bundles, smoothing out the drains so that we take out our point bars and we pack that back into our eroded corners. Riprap along bends to reduce that erosion. Down in the pond area, north of 44th, we're going to be constructing 2-stage ditches. So we have an area where the drain itself has cut itself downward, and so it's lost any access for floodplain storage up and out of its banks. So what we can do is we can take out dirt, we can widen that cross section and give it a place for that water to spill out, which lowers its velocity and helps keep it from eroding. We plan to turn in our permit to Eagle. A number of the activities on this do require state permitting. That'll happen this month. Once we're through Eagle permitting, we'll finish up our design and we anticipate bidding this out in the winter, spring of 2026 with a construction window of 2026 and probably the first part of 2027. So at the very beginning of this, right after we received our petition, right after we held our board of determination meeting, I sent an email notice to city staff. We gave an approximate project cost at that time of $3 million. And as it stands, that's about where we believe the project will be. We won't know final costs until we finish design and we bid it out and get actual numbers from contractors. So until we have anything better, that initial estimate is what we feel comfortable as that final project cost. As Ken mentioned, the costs for a project are borne by the drainage district. And so the city of Wyoming as an entity will have a proportional share of their runoff. And so we calculate that based on the amount of road right of way in the district. And then as well as Ken mentioned, we take 20% right off the top and we apportion that out to the different municipalities proportional to the area in the district. So the city as an entity will have a 16.5% at-large percentage with a road contribution percentage of 6.89. And you can see City of Granville, Byron Township, MDOT. And then the property owners within this district will pay about 72% of the entire project. There's roughly 2,400 parcels in this district. And the way that we determine each parcel's assessment is on the size of the property, as well as their land use characteristics. So for instance, someone with 10 acres pays more than someone with 1 acre or even a 1/4 acre residential lot. Someone with an acre of pavement generally pays more than someone with an acre of farmland or forest. That's how we apportion those costs out. And I think if you have any questions, we'd be willing to entertain those.
Questions? Go ahead.
Hear me? I got a couple things. Some of them have to do with, one has to do with the drain, one doesn't. So just, we don't get you here very often, so keep you under the gun. So I guess dealing with the drain, why doesn't the county contribute to any of the costs?
The county does contribute to a cost.
Okay.
I just don't have it up there.
Well, I'm just looking at the numbers here. I don't see where the county is listed.
There's no county roads in the district. There's only land from Byron Township, so that's why they receive 0.2% And then the remaining municipalities are both cities. And so the city is responsible for city roads. So the county would pay for benefit to county roads. So if we had 68th Street in the township in this district, then the county itself would pay for their contribution of runoff from that road.
That's not very generous.
So, yeah, but you're a city, not a township, so you own your own roads.
Right. Well, it's my job to look out for our city. So that's what I'm trying to do here.
So the county gets some relief when we do some work in the city, in a city, period.
Okay. And that relates with my other question, Ken, is how is the Drain Commission funded? I know it's through county taxes. Is the maintenance that you talked about, these maintenance projects that you've done, and I'm assuming that's all coming out of your budget. So you must have a budget.
No.
You don't have a
No
budget.
The only budget we have is an office budget. The county has to operate the drain commissioner's office by law. They have to give me a deputy by law, and they have to pay my salary by law. Nothing else do they have to give me. Joel is a blessing from the county.
Works
Lonnie
for free?
and John, none of those are required under law. And a lot of counties don't give their drain commissioners that support. But Kent County does, and it's a good thing they do. So the budget only covers the office. Any work we do is paid for by the corporations, which is a district. They're each their own legal entity. And how many districts do we have in Kent County?
650 different drains.
650.
So when you do maintenance, like you said, you did some maintenance in the last 4 years, you've done maintenance twice. Where does that money come from?
It gets assessed to the property owner.
It does. Okay.
And we, by law, we have 2 years to assess any expenditures that we create.
So is there that 10-day window every time that you do maintenance, or you just assess, you're legally
Correct.
able to just assess? And I'm assuming those aren't huge numbers,
No,
and that's
they're very small.
okay.
In times past, on this particular drain, the city has elected to pay the entire cost of that maintenance rather than have it be assessed back to the people. So that's a very generous thing that the city has done.
Okay. And then I just have one other thing. One thing that you were talking about was supplemental benefit, and just it kind of caught my ears for a second. What would that look like if somebody was getting I mean, are they?
Yeah. So say we're digging up and we're not going to replace the culvert under 52nd, for an example. Say we were doing that, and Aaron wanted us to replace a section of water main, get it lower while we were there. That would be a project. So we would replace that water main while our hole was open for construction. The city would pay that piece as well as the other percentages, and then we would rebuild everything. So it typically comes in when there's an advantage because we're doing construction
Sure.
at the same time.
Does that benefit a homeowner if there's something in their property that? Because
They can.
It has in the past.
there's always unforeseen things. So
Yeah.
Okay, that's the extent of my questions. Thank you, Joel. Nice to meet you.
Anyone else?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm curious, are you adding detention along this in any way, shape, or since we don't have any in portions?
Yeah, so we are going to be adding 2-stage ditches in a number of spots. So there's, the channel is constricted. We're going to widen the channel. And so we have inline detention that we're adding. The bulk of the issues, though, are related to the flashiness of the water. And so we're going to address the problem that comes from that, which is the erosion. We're limited to where we can work, where we have our right of way. So we can really only work on the drain itself. We don't have the legal ability to go back to the upper watershed and start adding in detention ponds where they should have been constructed originally.
So property owners that happen to drain into detention before they hit the drain, do they get any kind of credit against their piece?
No, they still contribute a same amount. The only benefit of a detention pond is it just slows down that release relative to
Which is your problem right now, right? But, okay.
So over the years, the courts have been very specific on how they interpret runoff. So if you're in the district, because we've had many people will argue with me and say, I'm at the top, my land is all sand, it does not shed water. Well, in the middle of February, when the ground is frozen and it rains, and that's Michigan, you're shedding water. So the courts have interpreted if a drop of water leaves your property at any time, you are responsible to help pay for the maintenance of that drain.
And it gets portioned by area then no matter what.
Correct.
Even though,
Acreage at the head.
for example, if I bought in a neighborhood that I paid for detention when I bought there, I don't get any relief from that. Okay.
Because that detention eventually is going to flow over and go into the drain.
Okay.
Just at a slower rate.
So just using that city of Wyoming at large, 16% road runoff, 6.89. So that's 23% change. So if this is a $3 million project, and I know we don't have final costs yet, so at 23% or so, that's about $700,000 assessed to the city of Wyoming to pay for this project. And then the property owners are at 72%, and so they'd be responsible for $2.1 million of this project. And you mentioned there's times where, you know, the city can assume that $2.1 million or those individual property owners within the drainage district could be assessed that. Maybe for the benefit, and I know this is rough, but are you able to say at $2.1 million that would be assessed to property owners, you know, what a typical assessment would be to them?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it can vary. Is it $400? Is it $10,000? Is it?
Well, I've proven to myself that I can't do math on the fly.
Yeah.
I'm better with the calculator in front of me, John. So I'm not going to give you a number on that specifically. What I will say is that we do, when we levy assessments, especially at this cost, we have to get a bond for that, and we have that paid back over a number of years. And so property owners and even the city would not be expected to pay the entirety of their assessment all at once. Some municipalities, some property owners elect to do so because there is interest associated with getting municipal bond. But for something like this, we would pull a bond anywhere from 6 to 20 years. And then that would just be put on the winter taxes and paid back over time.
So just to make sure we all understand. So when this project goes, it's not a matter of what I'm hearing but when this project goes through and if it turns out to be a $3 million project, the city of Wyoming would be assessed approximately $700,000 for this. And then the property owners within this drainage district would be assessed about $2.1 million.
Which is about $900 a property owner. If it's 2,400.
Yep.
Is it? Yeah, I didn't hear. Is it 2,400?
Yeah, approximately.
Yeah, and I know it'll vary depending on size and so forth. So it's, and then with those, you said anywhere from 6 to 20 years, they would have to pay that back. And obviously they could pay it all at once, or they could pay it over time and pay interest on that.
Yes.
And is that something that just goes on the normal summer or winter tax bill, or is that something that we would put on like our normal special assessment? Because we bill out all our special assessments, I believe, in October.
It would go on the winter tax bill.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a substantial project. So I just wanted to make sure, council's aware this is, and I was pretty sure, and I'm not an expert on the drain code, so I appreciate the drain code 101 lesson here. But the big thing here too is this is a significant project at a significant cost, and I wanted to make sure council was aware of that.
And just perspective, this is my last project of this size. We don't have any more petitions to deal with at this point, and I hope we don't in the next 2 years. But up until this point, I have 9 more coming out for bid this year yet. We've done 3, and we have about 9 more to go, and then this next year. And none of these are under 3 million, none of them. Some of them are 4. We got one that's running 15. So when we ignore these drains and the people say enough is enough, and I get a petition, I have to do them. It's not whether I do, it's I have to. If that board gives me an order to proceed, that's it. You got 10 days to go to court with it to try and stop it. But once that's done, it's done. And people don't want to understand that, and they get very angry. And I get really nice love letters. But that's how it works with the drain code. And I personally live in a district that we're coming out with a bid package this fall on it, and guarantee I'm going to be a $4 million project. I'm probably looking at a $10,000 assessment. But that's what we got. Now, if we maintain these drains and we send letters out when we're done, it's very critical. The people let us know if they have a blockage and they can't remove it. To call our office, we'll get someone in there within 48 hours. Because when you get a blockage, you start tearing that drain apart. If that drain can run free without obstruction, the maintenance is very low on these drains. Very low. They can almost self-maintain. But as soon as you get blockage, you get problems. And that's what we got to prevent. So I'm hoping the people in the district, after getting all these projects back up and these drains functioning right, that we can keep our phones ringing.
Joel, you mentioned it, and I apologize. Based on the schedule of this would appear on, you said, the winter taxes of December of 26.
Yeah, I think so. If we bid it early next year, then we'll host our day of review, which is the opportunity for anybody who liable for an assessment to come in and talk about it, and then it triggers that potential appeal period. We'll host that in the first part of 2026. So then it would go on the winter tax bill that comes out at the end of 2026.
If someone wants to appeal it, you're saying they can't appeal the determination that this project has to
So
be done?
the
Is it just making
appeal-
sure the calculation was incorrect?
Yes. So an appeal of the assessment will not stop the project. It simply appeals the allocation of how much each person pays, basically the slices of your pie. And you have to prove two things: manifest error or inequality. And it's a high bar. It's not just simply a matter of opinion. It's manifest error and inequality. So
is the way that this is done and assessed, is this consistent in all counties in Michigan?
very much so. You know,
Okay, so
there's
there's no
minor
differences
variations in how much at-large percentage is allocated to municipalities. Ours, we do 20%, but that tends to be on the low side for most counties. And I can say this: I've been doing drain work for 18 years. I've only been at this drain office for 5, but I have worked in 4 drain commissioners all across the state of Michigan. And almost uniformly, every drain commissioner will assess to property owners on the basis of the size of their property and the land use characteristics. Then every other drain commissioner can take some elective options with that. But our process is very consistent internally to each district within our county, and especially over the years.
We've been challenged in court a lot, and we haven't lost. Because the system, the process that I continue to use is what the county has used forever. So it's been tested, been tried, it's consistent. It doesn't vary from drain commissioner to drain commissioner. It stays fair across the board. And it is a fair system on how we do our methodology. And the courts have agreed to that. So if we stay consistent on it, you know what to expect, you know where it's going to be. And it's been that way for many years before me. So I would tend to stay with that. I don't see a reason to waver from that.
It's just, I think from a resident standpoint, I mean, we're used to the roads getting fixed. It's all a public good, and it's something that's all done as an aggregate of the whole group. And then to have the individual assessments passed on in this, it's different.
Yeah.
And so to me, I struggle with it. And
Well,
I just,
and yes, I don't disagree, but you can look at it this way. And this is why, as a taxpayer property owner, I like this system. and having served in the House, I know where tax dollars go and how many of the tax dollars we actually get back that we send to Lansing. And if you're going to do drains and put them in that system, who needs a larger amount of money is the east side, because their pipes are big enough to drive a semi through, and they've had them fail. No, I don't want to pay for that. So this way, it's a user fee. So in Sparta, they got a $4 million project going. We got started. They're just starting on that. In the city of Grand Rapids, we're probably looking at 3. So when they have their work to be done, I don't want to be paying for that. There's no benefit in there. So what I have to pay for is a drain that my property drains into. I can't argue the benefit. I may not see it, but it's still, that's where my water flows. And that's fair taxation. You're not paying for anybody else's water to flow and be managed except for your own. And what you pay goes into your area. It don't get shipped to the east side of the state or anywhere else. So yeah, you think a tax base would be good, but be careful what you ask for. Because then all of a sudden you're having flooding like the street here that it was a garbage truck went through that, driving into Ramblewood. The thing went out, racked his truck up. So now we need money to pay for that. But it's a tax system. If I don't have enough money given to me, just like you guys deal with, how am I going to fix that? So this way, it's fair. Everybody has a part. And these big projects are very, very slim. They don't happen often. This is just a unique time. For some crazy reason, when I went in, everybody came out with a petition me on these big projects. I knew there were going to be a lot of them, but I didn't realize they'd be this expensive. But it's too late. I can't do anything about that. But this is not a common thing, and it's not a long-term thing. This is a flash, and we get the maintenance. So, and that's another thing. Joel and John have been, we've been focusing on an asset management plan, and we have walkers completed. So we have the pattern set on how we're going to put these together. And so I'm going to let you talk about what you got there.
So one of the problems that we have on this particular drain amongst many drains is it's deferred maintenance. We don't want to do it. It's expensive. We don't want to do it. It's expensive. We just kick the can. Well, now we have a big project and we're doing that. So we want to get out of reacting to our problems and more into an emphasis on inspecting our drains regularly, inspecting all of our infrastructure regularly, and then meeting with you as a municipality, providing to you a summary report of all of the infrastructure that we have within your city limits, and let you know, hey, these are in great condition. These ones are in poor condition. We anticipate doing work in 2027, 28, 20, to give you an idea of that. And so we've started that work. We intend to sit down with your neighbor, City of Walker, this fall and work with them through that asset management process. We're a lot past minutes, John.
No, that's okay. So Joel, again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the numbers here, but so if we have a $3 million project and 700,000 is the city itself, 2.1 million are our taxpayers, and you said the city could just assume that 2.1 million, so we'd be paying $3 million or not if we do it. And you said you might bond for, it could be 6 to 20 years.
Yeah.
If it's a 20-year bond, would then the taxpayers and the city have up to 20 years to repay that? If it's a 6-year bond, we'd only have 6 years to pay that?
Yeah, so we set that bond limit. We talked to a financial advisor and bond counsel. And so we figure out how many years versus interest, and then what that looks like for an average annual payment for a representative property owner, and what feels manageable. I mean, we've done a lot of these, so we have a good idea of what's annually manageable. And so then we set that years. We like to have conversations with the biggest payers prior to the day of review, especially on that average annual amount. Sometimes, especially more rural or agricultural watersheds, we have farmers with big acreage, a 40, a 80, a 160. And they give us good feedback on, 10 years is just fine. We'll be fine. Or I'd prefer 15. So we try and have those conversations.
What's the lifespan of this project? So when do you think if you implement the maintenance plan that you're talking about, when might you have to do something like this again?
Yeah. So I can never anticipate when a tree falls down.
Yeah.
I'm regularly in the portion of the drain south of 56th Street. We just get a lot of calls for trees being down in that particular area. There's probably 2 a year, 3 a year in that area. A culvert, a concrete culvert, 75 years plus. Riprap along a stream is probably a 35 to 50 year thing. So one of the things that bond counsel always asks for us is I have to take every element of the project, its cost, and then its estimated lifespan, and do a cost weighted lifespan for the project, because they want to know that it's longer than the bond term. So typically for a project like this, we're looking at a cost weighted lifespan of 35 to 45 years. And that matches with our interval of petitions in the past. I think we had a petition on this in the 80s. We're 40 years past that. So that seems to be the regular interval, depending on the watershed, the type of drain it is every 25 to 40 years, we get a petition to fix issues.
Other questions?
Yeah, a couple more questions. So let's just say, I signed up for a 20-year bond on this thing to pay for it, and I sell my house in 5 years.
So we often get calls from title companies at property transaction, and they reconcile that assessment at the time of a property transaction. So however buyer and seller agree to handle those costs is between buyer and seller, but often that gets reconciled or completely paid off at the time of property transaction.
Okay, that's good answer. And then, Rob came up with $875 per property owner, but I got to believe, because John, you kind of asked this question, what's going to cost? If we're looking at, we have some big property owners along this drain, Res Life, Ramblewood, I'm sure there's others.
Yep.
I got to believe that number is going to come down drastically from $900 yet because of these big property owners.
Yep, I would assume that.
I know Res Life owns 40 some acres or something.
Yeah,
So
they're a large property owner. Ramblewood is big. Maple Hill Golf Course might be the biggest piece of land in there, but I don't have those numbers at my fingertips.
no, but all I'm saying
That's exactly what happens is it gets weighted. The bigger parcels, especially if it's a bigger paved parcel, tends to soak up a lot of money, and then all the small parcels, really the quarter acre residential lots will go down on that. My parents' assessment will go down because of that.
And I thought I was getting out of this, but I go to Res Life, so.
Okay.
Res Life is aware this is coming, they're prepared.
Yeah. So that, to me, that softens the $900 blow, I think, significantly. And I can't put a number to it, but I got to believe it's, and then you put it out, if it's cut by cut by a third, you're down to $600. And if you put that over 20 years, I don't think people even see it, to be honest with you.
And it's interesting because we hear it all. I can't buy groceries. One guy told me he was going to kill himself. He can't afford it. And at the end of the day, when the assessments are put out, 60 to 65% pay up front. And even in what we would say are poor rural areas, they pay it up front. So you hear a lot of negative, but it comes down to they don't want to pay it. It ain't that they can't, is what we're finding. So this ain't fun. There's sometimes it really isn't fun. It's hard. But sometimes the crying's louder than the reality.
Well, and the work is something that needs to be done.
And the work has to be done, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ken, what's the interest rate on that bond? What's the interest charge to then the property owner?
Well, we're advised to use the 5 to 5.5%. All right, rate, just because the bond market's so flexible. And the last bond that we did was about 2 weeks ago. We closed on. It was a point lower than what we estimated it to be at. So then that reflects on the property owners. That gets passed on.
The 5 and 5.5 right
Yeah.
now is what we're assuming.
Okay,
You know, 9 months from now, it could be very different.
It could be
but-
lower.
all right.
Because they're tending to go down, so
Okay,
it won't go higher. I don't see that happening.
all right. Thank you. Thank you. This has been super interesting. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
It's a lot of
A
moving
drain
pieces in
commissioner.
the drain.
Yeah.
Half the county, half the surface area of the county is in a drainage
Yeah.
district. 140,000 parcels within the county are in a drainage district. And very few people, we're a 5-person office, right? We
Yeah.
got a lot of infrastructure. Very few people understand what we do. And so it's fun to educate and agitate a little.
I'm curious,
Educate, not
does it-
agitate.
how does any area not fall in a district?
A lot of cities, actually, a large portion of the city of Wyoming is not in drainage districts. So because of Buck Creek, Buck Creek from Ideal Park all the way to the Grand River is not a county drain.
Yeah.
And so if any of your local road storm sewer drains into Buck Creek, that's not in a drainage district. Likewise with City of Grand Rapids, East Grand Rapids, Kentwood.
Kentwood with Plaster Creek.
And so
is another-
most of our drains are actually in the rural areas. Byron Township has a ton. They get hit hard.
a
So,
third
What
of our
is it if
drains
it's not
are
a
in
drain?
pardon?
What is Buck Creek if it's not a drain?
It's natural water course. When we say the word drain, all that means is it's gone through a very specific legal process to be granted jurisdiction to our office. So the big thing is easements and rights of way. So most people, when they hear drain, they're just thinking of that physical infrastructure or their septic system. We get a lot of calls on that. But in our world, that means specific right of way. Right. Likewise, in the city, you've got public roads that you're responsible for. There's private roads that you have nothing to do with. It's still a road. But for you, 44th Street matters more than Turtle Bend Drive.
So Sheldon's actually considered waters of the state, just like the Grand River.
Correct.
Or,
But there is no entity responsible for maintaining that. So
So can we maintain Buck Creek? I mean,
with a permit at your
with a
cost.
permit
Yep.
from the state?
And Joel, we just redirected all of our storm sewers last year to Buck Creek, so I don't know if you knew.
All of them.
What's the timing of when you will know the final bid price? Because it says winter, spring, where you would say, hey, this is Wyoming share, these are the property ownership.
The big undetermined thing right now is our Eagle permitting. That could take 4 months. That could take 6 months. And we're optimistic that a number of our elements on this project are actually exempt from Eagle permitting. Drain commissions have exemptions that no other entity have. There's still elements that require permitting. And so sometimes they facilitate a permit fast and sometimes they go really slow. It's just hard to predict. But once we finish permitting, we'll get through final design and then bid it. We've already had a few meetings with your own city staff, your engineering and Aaron. I would anticipate that even before we come to the point of noticing for the day of review, we'll have another conversation with city staff.
We have to look at what we have to put in our city budget for fiscal year 27. So.
So
Other questions?
what will your communication plan be as far as keeping the residents informed about what's coming, what the final numbers are, when to see it, and all this? Because I think a little postcard mailer that doesn't seem to really answer. If there's any online resources that you can all point us to, or
Yeah, a number of our information is on our website, so people can look at that. Our biggest communication is with the city here, with city staff, because as a single entity, your assessment is going to be the largest. So we've been keeping Jeff and Aaron informed, John informed. Depending on the project, we will sometimes do a scoping meeting for the district to inform people on what we're doing. It all depends on the project. So we haven't had that conversation yet, Rob, but we can certainly take it into consideration.
I mean, even if as a resident, I could just even look it up and say, all right, what is my actual number?
We won't know that until once we receive bids, and we're statutorily required to host the day of review no less than 5 days, no more than 30 days after we open bids. So when we start the train on the train track and send our project out for bids, that starts a timeline that we have to follow. And so we will have conversations ahead of that. And then in that intervening time, after we send out bids, before we get them back, when we get bids and start fleshing out our spreadsheet on it too. So
And then if there's any appeals that get thrown in there, that kind of screws that all up. But we're still under that timeline. So the appeals got to move fast, but they can change your assessment. If the courts ruled that this one was too high, they then take that dollar amount and they got to distribute it as they see fit. We don't have any say on that. The courts make that decision. So all that stuff is unknown. So we don't know until we know. And we can't put numbers out there until we know. And that's not going to give people much time at that point.
It's very different from a municipal project you might do, where you'd get estimates, you might even get contractor bids, and then make a decision whether or not the dollar value necessitates the project. In our world, that decision of necessity is at the very beginning, at that board of determination. And once that board, independent of our office, decides a project is necessary, and they don't decide scope, schedule, or budget, simply, is there a problem that merits a solution? If they decide that it's necessary, we're obligated by law to fulfill that order. So that's another thing that often confuses people is, why can't we say no after we know the cost? Because it's necessity based. The drain code, the state law, there's a law set up to protect a flooded minority or an impacted minority. That's why 5 people can start a project. And the reason our lawmakers did that is without drainage, Michigan would be a giant wetland. The city of Wyoming would be a giant wetland.
Oh, yeah, you'd be
And
smart.
so that's why they placed the decision of necessity at the beginning. And then thereafter, the elected official is responsible for scope, schedule, budget, and apportionments. It's just very different.
Anyone else? Questions? Thank you. It's been very informative.
We tried really hard to stick to 20 minutes, John.
No, I know, it was a lot of.
We had a lot of
questions.
questions
Yeah.
also. Thank you.
And thank you for staying and answering.
And please feel free to reach out to our office with any further questions.
Next item on the agenda is the Kent County Sheriff's Office presentation. I understand Under Sheriff Brian Muir, Lieutenant Bill Marks, and Sergeant Ryan Dannenberg are here for that presentation.
Did you also give them 20 minutes?
We will try to be very respectful.
All depends on the question.
Thank you for having us. Just to start out, a little bit of information on us. Obviously, Under Sheriff Brian Muir is here. Sergeant Ryan Dannenberg is a member of our Crime Intelligence and Technology Division. I myself have been with the Sheriff's Office for 20 years. I spent a lot of my time in the Detective Bureau and came to the Crime Intelligence and Technology Division a couple of months ago. So I'm honored to be standing in front of you guys, giving you this information, and hope you're as excited about this project as we are. So I'll try to run through these slides quickly and give you an idea of what our project is, what we're doing. I guess right up front, I'll tell you that I'm pleased to announce that this really is not a money ask at all. It's cost neutral for the city of Wyoming. So it's a project that was funded by the Sheriff's Office, and that's how we intended to keep it for the foreseeable future. So I'm gonna have to run double computers here. So bear with me a second. So what is this project? The Real-Time Intelligence Center. It falls under the Crime and Intelligence Division. And what it is it's an attempt to pull several different technology platforms into one room in front of one person or multiple people that can look at this intelligence and make good informed decisions rapidly. I kind of use the analogy of a smartphone. We've all got a smartphone. It does one thing real well. It makes phone calls, but it doesn't do much else well unless you have apps downloaded to go to Facebook and to go to your bank and what have you. This is kind of the same thing. We're looking to pull all those apps into one central resource. In addition to the apps, we want not just one entity's apps, but we want apps from every entity within Kent County, all law enforcement. So that's why we're asking for other municipalities to join and partner with us in sharing information and kind of developing this real-time intelligence center. Some of our goals. Prevent and disrupt crime. This is a project that we want to be very transparent. Our goal is not to do this behind kind of a cloak or in the shadows. We want to be very upfront with the public and tell them what we're doing. We're going to ask for quite a bit of public contributions to share some security cameras, some video cameras with us that we can monitor in real time to help mitigate that crime. And I think we need to be very transparent with our messaging and what we intend to do with it, how we're going to use it, and why our ask is what our ask is. One of our goals is to support investigations. We look at the goals of pulling in these camera feeds is to, again, look at this stuff in real time. We have security systems on various buildings throughout Wyoming, up and down 28th Street, and all of those security systems are accessed by a single person at a different location that's usually not readily accessible to us when a crime occurs, right? So part of the project would be to contact that business, ask the business if they're willing to share their camera feeds with us. And I'll get into that a little bit later on how that works. But ultimately they say, yep, we're willing to share the 3 outside cameras at our gas station. Feel free to use those. So we pull those in, and when a crime occurs or a situation occurs along 28th Street near that gas station, from our map, we can log right into that camera and look and get the information we need in real time. So our goal here is to really be effective and efficient in the use of taxpayers' dollars. We have a limited number of resources, a limited number of personnel, and without having to ask for additional personnel, we can leverage technology to fill a lot of those same gaps, and that's our goal. How this problem began. We look at our 911 system, and the analog 911 system from back in the day was just antiquated. Calls would come in during a mass casualty, mass critical incident, and you have callers waiting in line, you have calls that get dropped. They're just not being answered, and we're not pulling the information from the caller as effectively as we could. There's no way to triage a person who may be on scene versus one who just wants information, or one that has current information versus one that saw something 10 minutes ago. There's no way to triage that in 911. So this really started with the schools, and to help fix that problem, we received a $2.5 million grant to install radios in every school building in Kent County, all districts. That radio's got a big giant orange button on the front of it. It's an emergency radio. And anytime there's an emergency in the school, anybody can push the button. They get a 10-second open mic right into dispatch, and they can tell the dispatcher exactly what's going on in real time. So that was kind of our step number 2 on how do we get better information during these critical incidents. That project was started. We received our grant. We came in underfunded and used the remainder to build the Real-Time Intelligence Center. This is kind of our step number 3. What's better than third-hand information is like first-hand information, and what's better than first-hand is live video. We talk about live video in the schools. Again, that's where it started, but who can participate? We talked about the gas stations. Really, anybody that has a camera system can participate. Anybody that's a business, I should specify that. I want to make that pretty clear. If you're a business that has a camera system and you get a core, the core is what it's called, you tell us which camera streams you want to share. And they come into our system through that method. That's far different than what we call the registry. And the registry is down on the bottom. We can't ingest Ring cameras, doorbell cameras, or anything else like that. So again, we want to be clear in our messaging. Our goal here is not to watch your Ring camera. We can't do that. What we can do is ask you to go online, tell us that you have a Ring camera. We're kind of creating like a phone book or a database. Who has one? And when something happens in that area, we'll send out a message through the FUSA system here. The message will be, we had an incident that occurred at 2 a.m. Involving a white sedan. Will you please check your Ring camera and see if you had footage? If you do, upload it here. People can opt in or opt out of that, but that's the extent of our contact with them and their camera. So I don't want to have any public misconceptions here that we have access directly to that camera, because we don't. So, going back to the school, sorry. Going back to the school, safeguards. Who has access? These are big questions that will be asked. And again, we want to be upfront. Access is limited to the people in law enforcement in our consortium, our group of law enforcement agencies in Kent County. Participation, again, strictly voluntary. Business owners can opt in or opt out at any time. If they simply unplug the black box, then they can opt out. We have MOUs in place, and a memorandum of understanding is an agreement between us and each school district that shares their camera feeds with us that tells us when we can and cannot access their cameras. Largely, their exterior cameras are going to be a little more accessible to us for incidents that might occur in the parking lot or nearby, so we can help with information about when a school needs to go into lockdown, or at least provide that information to them. Stuff that happens inside the school, and Sergeant Danenberg will go over this when he shows you the Fusus demo, but to even access one of those cameras, you have to click past a warning sign on Fusus that says, basically, you're entering a camera, you need to have a good reason to be here. There needs to be a 911 call, a significant event. Something has to occur within this set of rules for you to access this camera. So we put that in place, in addition to a fairly robust audit trail. Fusus as a platform will log every single click that goes into Fusus. It'll tell you the duration of time that a person was in a camera, specifically which camera, and then when they got out. There's places to add notes and comments and to basically document why we were there. So again, the audit trail can be printed at any time for a business or a school. We want to be transparent on how we're using this technology. How does it work? We talked a little bit about that. Fusus is a platform, again, that ingests all different kinds of data. It can pull in body-worn cameras. It can pull in vehicle license plate readers. It can pull in vehicle location sensors. It can pull in cameras. It can pull in all kinds of things, put them on one screen, and then there's no need for a person in the Arctic to go to an outside data source and log in independently. It's all right there to click. So you can imagine something happens along 28th Street here. We get information that it was potentially a red car, but that's all we have. If there were businesses down the road, we would have a short amount of time to quickly look at each one of those videos, see if the vehicle passed. Can we get more information, and can we use that information to help solve that crime? So as a business owner or a person with a camera system, how would you participate? And this is going to be a real quick 1-minute video that talks about how the core works. Hopefully.
Setting up Fusus is fast, requires no hardware, and has no activation fees. You simply plug a Fusus core into your existing camera or network, and within seconds, the video feed is analyzed, securely encrypted, and transmitted either by an ongoing live stream or on demand based on an alert. And unlike other systems, video and alert sharing is completely controlled by the donor location. For example, schools may choose to limit video sharing to emergency situations, like an active shooter event. And the camera itself can be shared based on the priority of the call, an associated sharing policy. In an investigation, police can automatically request footage from all nearby businesses at the click of a button. And camera owners can securely share recorded as well as live video feeds to aid in the investigation.
So it's a quick explanation on how the core system works. The core is just one component of Fusus. Camera feeds are just one component of this. We are relying heavily on technology that we already have access to also. Again, we're just bringing it into that single platform so it's easy to access. We're looking at ABCC with a nationwide data share. We're partnering with, again, our local law enforcement agencies in Kent County, and we're sharing reports to them. Any information we have, they can have. We look at our drone feeds. The situation, we partner with Wyoming here for Metro Cruise along 28th Street, and we have the ability to share our drone feed into Fusus. Wyoming has the ability to pull up their own Fusus because we've now shared, and they can see our drone feed. Every officer from the cruiser, the command post, everybody can see it. No longer will one person be in the command post and have to be the only person with access to the drone feed. And that goes for nearly every piece of technology we have ingested in the system. So we have a couple more listed here of different pieces of technology that we currently use. I won't go through all of them, but you can imagine our license plate readers and all of that. This right here is another short video that really talks a little more about, if we're being honest, this is a sales pitch from Axon. I know you guys are all familiar with what Axon is, right? Okay. So this is a sales pitch from Axon, but it really does a decent job in demonstrating how the system can work. This one goes a little further. There's for body cams, Axon does sell body cams to individual retailers. So this particular retailer has a body cam. He has a person inside that's creating a disturbance. He activates his body cam. The monitoring center picks up his feed, looks at it, jumps into the interior cameras, identifies the vehicle, notifies police, a drone is launched, the vehicle is determined to be stolen, and the vehicle's tracked to an area where the suspect flees. A single responding officer can be directed from dispatch or from the RTIC to pull up to this location. That's where the car's at, run down this alleyway, turn left, go right, and your suspect will be here. So instead of having a big perimeter with canines and all of that stuff, we can use our resources more effectively. And this is kind of what this shows you here.
Anything I can help you, sir? What do we got? Sir, you need to put that back.
This is Michael Harris with Secure Solutions Global Security Operations Center. We are currently witnessing a crime in progress at our store location at 1201 North Wilmington. There appears to be a robbery in progress.
This is a stolen vehicle.
Let's get a drone out there.
Suspect car located, heading north on Columbus. Suspect fleeing on foot. Officer arriving on location. Vehicle's empty. Do we have eyes on suspect? Suspect is fleeing on the east side of the building. Officer in pursuit of suspect. Suspect has turned left down the alley.
So it kind of gives you an idea of what our end goal is as far as pulling all the different technologies into one place, relaying real-time intelligence to the officers on scene, and allow them to respond with better information and more effectively. Is the technology proven? There's about 1,000 real-time crime centers active right now across the United States, some quite large, some very small. So a few examples. Miami did a study, and you can see some of the statistics here about when their crime centers involved, what the percentage rates are for basically solving the crime or clearing the crime. And you have 48% there for an arrest when biological evidence is collected, 68% when physical evidence is collected, and a 66% overall increase in clearance rates when an Arctic is involved. Another example here, San Francisco. San Francisco started their real-time crime center a year ago. They had a $9 million grant to start their center, and within 1 year, they saw a 42% drop in auto theft. I mean, that one statistic alone is pretty remarkable. They were involved in over 500 different arrests, and for Q1 of 25, they're on track for similar numbers. So they've seen a real impact in their community, a positive impact as far as crime rates go. A couple other less traditional uses. New Orleans, they use it to deal with their flooding issues. They work closely with emergency management. They can allocate resources. They can keep track of where people are. They can see exactly where each officer is based on a body cam. They can see where their vehicles are. Using the camera network, they have the ability to see if a particular area is shut off and somebody goes in the area, they're likely going to have a rescue soon and can help respond to that. So out in Washington, they use it for wildfire management. Again, a similar situation, a large-scale incident that we're trying to manage a lot of resources at one time and do it effectively. Both of those incidents, I mean, we look at a simple fire here. We can use this technology for a response to a fire to coordinate a fire department, what responses or what resources are needed. A lot of different ways that this center can be used because it is real-time information. How does it deliver an immediate impact? We look at major venues. Soccer stadium here is one that's listed. Imagine a time where we can have cameras from a soccer stadium pulled into a real-time crime center. Vantage point is quite a bit different. We can see more than the human eye can see. We don't need to have 30 officers at that scene anymore. We can put 4 officers potentially, pull them to a centralized location and have them respond to incidents as they occur versus being at eye level, and they might not be able to see over a crowd into things that are happening. So it's just one example of how this technology can be used at a major venue. Schools, I think, are the most impactful for me and how the project started. We look at an active shooter situation, and we're all aware of the incident that occurred at MSU a couple years ago. That incident occurs, it was 6 minutes before the first 911 call was made. It was minutes after that before the police arrived on scene. And for a period of 15 minutes, the assailant's going from building to building, inside of some, not inside of others, and wreaking havoc on this campus. And you have people who are so worried about self-preservation, they can't even call 911. The police get there, and they spend quite a bit of time going floor to floor, building to building, searching every single one of them, because we don't have any good information. We have a lot of systems on that campus. They don't talk to each other. Nobody knows who has access or how to search those cameras to get a good suspect description. So the police are left doing the best that they can, right? Well, it wasted a ton of time. And no offense to MSU, they actually did a really good job with what they had, but we can do better. 3 hours is how much time passed before we had a real suspect description that went out. And within 20 minutes of the suspect description being out, he was found. How much better could we have done if it had come out in the first 5 minutes versus waiting 3 hours? What does this mean for you? The entire objective here is safer communities. That's what we're after. We're not looking to do anything except for just that. And I think that's an important point. There's some studies that have shown that people are more apt to travel a certain path if they know that there are security cameras in place. They actually feel more comfortable. There's been examples of a community in Florida who had a real issue with, I'll call it visitors coming down and causing problems during certain times of the year, and their business district really was impacted. So what they did is they actually put a ton of cameras up all along that business district, and they put signs to go with them. This is a police camera, or this area is under surveillance. And guess what happened in 1 year? the problem went away, and now the district is back to what it should have been in the first place, where people are safe walking around no matter what time of day or night. So this does have real benefits to the community. Businesses obviously get a visible deterrence. We want people to know that we're looking at cameras. I think it helps the business to be able to say that, to send that message. And finally, for the Board of Commission, for the city councils, for you folks, measurable outcomes. There are statistics to support the fact this technology works. We all understand that dollars and cents make dollars and cents, right? That's what drives us. That's what we have to operate under, and we only have so much of it. So this is a way that we can help increase our level of service without an ask for additional personnel, trying to make the best of what we have. And to leverage technology is really one of the best ways to do that. So I'll let Sergeant Dannenberg jump up and take over from here. He's got a couple slides, and he'll talk about what our Fusus map looks like. He'll talk a little bit about our drone system, our resident expert on that. And then following that, we can answer any questions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Very excited just to show you a quick glimpse into the Fusus program and just kind of show you where this, they call it the single pane glass, where we're taking all these technologies that we're already using with great success and bring them into one platform to be even more successful. So you can see in the first screen here, this would be part of our Fusus map. And you can see there's a lot of different icons, a lot of different things going on. But quickly you can see kind of right in the upper right, car 356 there. That's one of our fleet cameras, okay? The Axon body-worn cameras, the Axon fleet cameras come right into this system. So if I were to click on that camera, that feed would pop right up. You can also see right adjacent to that, 2 camera feeds that are already up, and that they draw lines directly to the cameras on that building. That's over by our campus, so right at 701 Ball there, a couple of the camera feeds that have showed up. But not only do I can I see those camera feeds, it automatically draws a line to where I'm looking at, so I have real-time intelligence as to where the issue is taking place. Then you can see in the lower right, my body-worn camera there, that also populates right into this screen. So no longer am I wondering where are my partners at in comparison to the incident. I can look right at the map and have that information available as well. So in the lower left, we'll talk more about the drone stuff here in a second, but the drone sense alert that pops in there, that's one of our streaming platforms for our drones, and it automatically populates into Fusus as well. Like I said, this is kind of that, it's a system where all these other technologies ingest very easily into it. So we have lots of integrations already built in this. It's not just the body-worn cameras and our fleets. It is all those business cameras, campus cameras from here, drones, all those things. So we talked about schools. This is kind of a mock floor plan of what you would expect kind of from a school, maybe an elementary school or a smaller school. And you can see it's got 4 cameras on it, 4 camera icons. I can click on one of those camera icons and bring up that feed. The floor plan is especially interesting portion of this because if you had interior cameras on this model, you could direct somebody directly to a classroom, directly to the appropriate hallway, determine the exact access point if there was a crime occurring that took place inside a school. And once again, instead of waiting minutes or hours to get that intelligence out to people, you can get it out immediately, direct, even a single officer to exactly where they need to go. In the lower left there, that is an example of our MOU summary. So kind of the Cliff Notes version of, our camera sharing agreement, how and when you're supposed to access these cameras. It's very transparent, and we've had training with our department staff already that you're not able to access these cameras just for no reason at all. There's certain criteria that you have to meet in order to be able to access these cameras. We take that responsibility very seriously, that schools are entrusting us with exterior and interior camera feeds. So that's not something you can kind of click through. As soon as you get to a location that's a school that has a camera sharing agreement, that's very forward-facing. It's right there. And then additionally, under some media files, you can download the full camera sharing agreement and read it in its entirety as well. And then this is just a screen grab from our drone as first responder trial that we're doing. This was launched from a drone dock on the south end of the county. You can see one of the coolest things about flying from the desktop version of this app for the Skydio drone is these address layers in the map here. So you can see, we're just talking about Buck Creek, but you can see it running through this map here. You can see 68th Street, you can see the M6 trail, you can see all the different addresses before, where I can say, hey, I think they ran, it's like the third house on the right. I'm trying to tell people where to go. If I see a heat signature, if I see a person running. Now I can tell them an exact address. And additionally, on a different map view of this, I can see the body worn cameras and fleets of everybody working that area. And I can direct a drone to fly directly to that area. Additionally, this drone itself flies on 5G network. So it's no longer limited by controller signal. So I can, under ideal conditions, I can fly over 3 miles away. Limitations are just battery right now. So 2.5, 3 mile radius, no problem. Can fly within that area and respond to things in real time.
Current drone speed?
What's that?
What's the current drone speed?
Current drone speed?
Yeah.
Well, depending on wind, but 36 miles per hour about.
Okay.
If I get a tailwind, it'll be better. If I get a headwind, it's going to be a lot worse, but that's about where we're at right now. And it's a good question because the drone landscape's ever changing right now. It's changing very quickly. The amount of drones that are coming out on the market, especially American made, is growing every day. The ability to have even larger platform drones that can fly faster, be in the air longer is very much in the near future. That's all I got for the demo.
Questions?
I have a question. How do we, so I know you had mentioned that you would share this information with the city offices and whatnot. I guess, how do we determine what organizations do and don't have access in terms of like larger organizations, like federal or state?
So the way we manage that is this is a system that's, again, purchased by Kent County and shared and works in conjunction with your current Axon system and software. So we have a consortium in Kent County that basically is a group that allows us to work together. We have agreements and we have rules, if you will, that credentialed people from within that group are people that have access. The federal agencies are not directly involved in this and wouldn't have direct access.
Okay. And if they were to request access, would that be something that would be considered? Or
access could potentially be facilitated. Obviously, there's a level of cooperation that we would do with any law enforcement agency, but it would be more specific to maybe a platform or a technology piece within this that they would already be able to request on the side. So this really doesn't add a lot necessarily. This really just pulls all of our technology together in one place, and really it's meant for, again, that real-time response. So it really wouldn't be applicable to a historical ask. It's more of a current situation that's ongoing.
Can I pick it up? If you're accessing a camera at a business, are they notified at any point, like afterwards, that there's been?
Not notified directly, no. No, it's part of the agreement that we would set with them in the beginning. They would tell us which cameras that they want to share and under what conditions they're willing to share them.
If you were to access the inside of a school, would the parents be notified?
That would be up to the school to communicate that.
Okay.
We would certainly communicate with the school, but we would leave it up to the school to communicate that with the parents.
And maybe I'll touch base just a little bit more on that. So there's a redundant audit trail available in Fusus. So you have a business owner, the agreement comes on base, they want a 30-day review of everyone that accesses your cameras. We have the ability to build that audit trail, automatically send that to them, no different than the school. So if we correlated going into a camera inside the school as part of the MOU, on a monthly basis, we can give to the superintendent of the school board when we access your cameras. I mean, the hope for building a system like this is that we never have to access the cameras inside a school. It's only going to be on a critical incident, 911 call, and activation of that school radio network that's in place already. So the ability and the opportunity are really based on the same parameters today that we have access into those systems. An emergency coming from the schools that needs to be called for intervention.
That makes sense.
And then just a little bit of follow-up. I think Bill kind of mentioned, credentialing. We won't credential federal law enforcement to have access into our systems. But just like all law enforcement, if they ask us to share certain information, reports, records, some of that information is shared with a law enforcement report or nexus. I know immigration comes to be the biggest question in mind of everybody else. It's not meant to bolster or support the immigration enforcement here in West Michigan at all. It would be HSI investigations, human trafficking, drug investigations, significant crimes that we're looking to resolve as a community here in West Michigan. It's not meant to be a surveillance system for ICE immigration enforcement.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was wondering.
Good questions.
Any other questions?
So I'm curious, with the private business, do you record that information, or do you record it only when you access it, or how's that work?
Sure, great question. So we built in a buffering period is what it boils down to. A day and a half to 2 days is about our buffering period. So we can go back in time for that period of time, potentially find whatever information we needed, and use it kind of in a real-time capacity. Our intent is not to record for 30 days or anything like that. In addition, if we did find something that was of evidentiary value, we'd reach out to the business, use the appropriate legal channels to request that video to be used in court. So we still plan to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You have the capacity to make that recording. You don't rely on their recording system to, I know that's a technology question, but.
It is, and it would depend on how much time has elapsed. And it would also depend on our agreement with them. So the individual business can, dictate that based on our agreement of what level of access we have. Are we allowed to retain? If we are, for what length? How it can be used? And if we find something that we need, we can always go back to the business with the same legal paperwork that we would normally bring them and ask them for a particular clip, a date, a time, what have you.
And this center is embedded right in the 911 call center. Is that how that works?
It works really closely with the 911 call center, but it's actually separate. And the reason for that is it's in the sheriff's office. And the reason for that is because 911, there's so much responsibility in that room already. I mean, I think they sit in front of like 16 screens. So to ask them to do some of this stuff, we're talking a lot about the camera feeds and the real-time visuals, but there's also an intelligence component to this that, maybe it means reading a couple different reports, or, we have information that this particular thing happened. Well, maybe a partnering agency dealt with the same thing last night, and sharing information would help us respond better. So this is meant to be very much a parallel, but not the same.
Good questions. Thank you. Very informative.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the proposed housing TIF policy. John.
So Nicole's going to come up and present the proposed policy, but there was a change in our brownfield tax increment finance law, I think back in 2023. If you recall, we could use what's called tax increment financing to help pay to redevelop brownfield contaminated properties. And the state legislature passed a new statute in 2023 that extended that financing to housing projects. So we wanted to present a kind of a draft policy to the council, get some feedback from you if this is something that we want to pursue. So.
Good evening. I should be done in about 2 hours here, so we'll take our time working through. So as John mentioned, we talked back in March about some economic development tools, and one of the tools that we spoke with you about was the amendment to the brownfield legislation, which allows for housing TIF, or tax increment financing. So briefly, when we talk about TIF, we're talking about a tool used by municipalities to create financial incentives for developers to construct projects that might otherwise not be developed, with the intent that any short-term gains be reinvested and leveraged. Brownfield plans to use this captured tax increment revenue to reimburse developers for eligible expenses. This is something that we've been doing in our community for many years. You've just most readily seen it in industrial developments. This does help to level the playing field, and a key benefit is that it supports economic growth and revitalization in the area. In 2023, Public Act 90 was amended to allow for an eligible property to include housing property and eligible activities to include housing development activities. Housing property is defined in the legislation as a property on which one or more units of residential housing are property or proposed to be constructed, rehabilitated, or otherwise designed to be used as a dwelling, or a property on which one or more units of residential housing are proposed to be constructed or rehabilitated and located in a mixed-use project. So this could go for both mixed-use construction as well as a standard residential project. This should look familiar to you. I just wanted to remind everyone that when we're talking about tax increment, what we're talking about is the new increment revenue. So that's that blue box. And that is what's used to reimburse the developer. So your green box along the bottom, that's your tax revenue that would be available to Wyoming during the length of the plan. And then at the end of the plan, once it concludes, the city then captures all of that remaining or new revenue in addition to what was the standard revenue previously.
Yeah, and I think we, just to maybe give a very fictitious example, and we talked about this before, is pre-development. If a property is worth $1,000 and then it's redeveloped and now it's worth it generates $10,000 in tax revenue. That difference is $9,000 in new tax revenue, and TIF would capture that new tax revenue, that $9,000, and then pay it back to the developer for those agreed upon costs. So the city would still get its original tax revenue, but any new tax revenue generated would be captured and sent to the developer to pay back those costs. And then when those costs are fully repaid, now the city would get all of that new tax revenue going forward. If that makes sense.
So historically, this had only been done for industrial properties with eligible expenses. The new legislation allows for the same thing to occur for eligible housing activities. So now that reimbursement can be used for housing projects as well. So as we talked about before, it's always about thoughtful considerations. So we have a strategic plan and master plan goals for encouraging more affordable housing, providing greater diversity, reducing the number of cost burden households. But of course, we're always considering the impact on our city funds and our city operations. And so when crafting this policy, all of those considerations came into play. When we spoke with council earlier this year, council had asked that reimbursable housing development activities be limited to the following: the cost of infrastructure available for public use and safety improvements, and costs of demolition for existing buildings and site prep. The legislation itself is more expansive, but really narrowing in on just the couple of areas that we wanted the policy to hit on is what ended up being the draft. So we did draft a policy. We've shared it and had a discussion with the Wyoming Brownfield Redevelopment Authority this summer. The draft was included in your packet, so I'm just going to briefly go through a couple of the highlights. As I mentioned, it does include those two eligible housing development activities, that cost of infrastructure and the cost of demolition. It specifically defines that if it is a greenfield lot with less than 5% lot coverage, it limits to only the cost of infrastructure available for public use. That was something that we heard from the conversation with council. And it sets a capture limit of 70% for the developer, meaning that there would essentially be a 30% pass-through that would go back to the municipality. So in addition to that, if you think back to that graphic, the maintenance, if you will, think about that standard property tax capture, there would also be an additional 30% that would come back to the city during the life of that plan. It sets criteria for projects that include rent and income restricted apartments. A couple of the key things here are to note that the legislation actually allows you to go up to 180% of AMI. We capped it at 90%. At least 20% of all units should be rented below market rate. And let me take a step back here. The reason for capping it at 90% is because in Wyoming, that's market rate. And the intent is not to incentivize market rate development, it's to incentivize affordable housing. So we capped it at 90%, tailored specifically to our community. And then rent and income restrictions must be in place for a minimum of 10 years or the proposed period of reimbursement, whichever is greater. So it's possible that you could have a brownfield plan come forward that says, I only need 7 years. Then in that case, the 10 years minimum would be required for affordability. Or if there was a plan that was a longer term period of plan, they would still be required to hold out affordability over the length of that plan. Say maybe it was a 15-year plan, they would have to hold affordability through the entirety of that plan. The application also does require the developer to demonstrate financial need. Mr. Arnois, I think this was a comment that you had brought forward. So we do require a pro forma, and then we weigh that in consideration. And preference will be given to projects located along commercial corridors with adjacent commercial activity and access to multimodal transportation, majority homeowner occupied units, and those that are aligned with Wyoming Reimagined, our most recent housing needs assessment, and those that spur economic growth in the city of Wyoming. So that was just a very high level overview of the draft. It was a 4-page draft included in your packets. I'm happy to address any specific questions that you have, but I didn't want to go through page by page. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I can talk about next steps.
So, in essence, the policy is trying to set some criteria by which the city would, using the new tax revenue generated by a development, reimburse the developer for some of their costs in return for them to be building affordable housing, at a certain price point or a certain rental point for a certain number of years. That's the whole concept behind this.
So your report mentioned at one point that a homeowner could not attempt to use this, but it's still a single family residence is eligible. What would that look like?
You have to have multiple single families, so it would be through a development. So a developer would have to be looking at multiple parcels, looking to have that benefit for all of the parcels. A singular owner can't go forward and say, well, I want to make this improvement on this parcel and I'm looking for reimbursement on that.
What about somebody that comes into the city and wants to buy 20 housing units in different areas, all single family?
So you can do desegregated brownfield plans. It's a little bit more challenging. Muskegon has actually done that recently where they've had plans that have kind of clustered into different areas and they all get wrapped into one plan. So it would be possible. We'd have to work with the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority and with council to determine if the magnitude of that met all of the criteria.
So I guess my concern with that would be that if that was the scenario, that those would be for resale. And I don't know if that's part of this plan or not, but I would not want to see a big corporation come in and gobble up single family homes and take them off the market for homeowners and rent them out and use this plan.
Yeah, I really don't think that was the intent of this plan, and that wouldn't get support at a staff level. Really, you may see a rehabilitation. For example, I think this would be most common with an apartment complex, as we've already seen some apartment complexes look for rehabilitation dollars. So you'd likely see it in that type of scenario. You might also see it as a way to level the playing field with the cost of just greenfield. So a developer coming in, wanting to build new single family homes to help make them more affordable, they're looking to bring down some of the costs. So by reimbursing public infrastructure, you lower that initial entryway, which helps ultimately reduce the cost of housing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
What do you mean by like public infrastructure? Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so it's public roads, sidewalks, sewer, water, so traditional public infrastructure.
Okay, so we're giving them a break on building all of that.
Correct. If they ask for it as part of the plan, we could reimburse them for those costs.
Okay, after it's done. Because I know we talked about it before.
Yeah,
After it's all
the
done.
developer would pay those costs up front with their own money. And then the new tax revenue that's generated from the new development, we would take that would be captured and then each year sent to the developer to repay the developer for that public infrastructure cost. And that would happen over a number of years until all of their costs are repaid. And we'd have to agree what those costs are and how much. But they pay it up front and then we reimburse them each year based on how much new tax revenue is generated. And then once we fully pay them back, then the city keeps all of that new tax revenue. And the idea is, do we try to lower the cost ultimately to the developer in return for building, affordable housing?
And what are the years for the TIF?
So it's going to vary by project. The policy allows for up to 25 years. We've had developers that we've had recent conversations with that are coming in for potentially an 8-year ask. So it's based on what the specific ask is and what makes the most sense in time for reimbursement of those asks.
Okay, minimum of 5 years, you said?
No, maximum of 25.
Okay, what's the minimum?
There's no minimum per se, but traditionally it might, I've never seen one more or less than maybe 5 to 7 or 8 years. You have to have enough to actually produce revenue to be able to pay back the reimbursement.
Okay. So one more question, clarification, I guess. You talked about a differentiation with a state school tax versus just city. Is it just city or every other organization or school tax?
So the way the MSHDA legislation currently works, a developer can come in and if they meet all of the criteria that MSHDA has put out for this program, they can get approval without seeking state education tax or SET. If they decide that they want to go for SET, which allows them to capture more and potentially pay back their reimbursement faster, they would have to go through the MEDC for an additional review, which can add about 180 days onto their review and approval. So we've had, just like traditional brownfield plans, we have some developers that once they run their performance, they look at it or their TIF tables and they go, it doesn't make any sense for us to go through the process of receiving SET or applying for it. There are others that want to reduce the amount of time and capture more, and then they can go and ask for that approval if they want to.
But if it's just the city is it just the city portion, or is like the Rapid in there? And
So it would be all local taxing jurisdictions.
other question?
So Renee, just to come, maybe just, or for council too, and again, using a fictitious example, and pre-development, this site is generating $1,000 a year in tax revenue, and then we build the development, it's generating, I'll just use an easy number, 11,000. So the difference is $10,000 in new tax revenue. And if that developer has $100,000 in costs that we agreed to reimburse, the first year we're paying them $10,000. So now that balance comes down to $90,000. Next year, I'm keeping this really simple, assuming taxable values don't go up. We send them another $10,000. Now we only have to reimburse them $80,000. So it'll take us 10 years in this example to pay them back. And at the end of those 10 years, we now get to keep that $10,000 a year in new tax revenue because we fully paid. I don't know if that helps or muddies the water more.
And what about the 70% cap?
So I'm using an example of 100% tax capture just to try to keep the concept easy.
Okay. But we would actually keep.
So if we were only capturing, for example, 70% in that example, that $10,000 in new tax revenue, we would send the developer $7,000 and we would keep $3,000, just to use that example.
Because that's what's on the table, correct?
That's correct. So this is different than the standard industrial brownfield. Traditionally in that we do the 100%, but this legislation does allow for us to reduce that. And that's what this program or this policy currently proposes, is that 70% capture.
So we would be able to keep some of that new tax revenue right off the bat and then let them take the other 70% until they pay back.
And so would the other, like the Rapid and everybody else?
It'd be the same tax capture rate. Yep.
And there's no financial calculation. So if it's a 10-year payback, that they're getting 5% on top of that, whatever the cost of money is for that. It is what it is. The cost of, say, at year one, reimbursed over 10 years, it's that same dollar amount.
Is there any
factoring?
This is the danger of me using a very simplistic, because each year normally taxable value goes up, so the amount of taxes generated goes up each year.
Mm-hmm.
So in the example I gave, the city would always, using the 7, we would always keep the 30%. But I gave an example where the new taxes generated in the first year would be $10,000. Well, if property values keep going up, maybe in the second year we're generating $11,000 in new taxes. Right. So now we would keep 30% of 11,000, whatever that is, and the other 70% will go to that developer.
Yeah, but if I'm the developer, and let's just say I'm fronting $100,000, and if I'm going to get paid back over a 10-year, I'm going to play bank. Basically, if I'm going to get paid back over 10 years, am I going to get paid back that $100,000, or am I getting $100,000 plus what that cost of money is over the course of that time?
$100,000.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no interest allowed, so it's just that full reimbursement.
Thank you.
Yep. It specifically says that in the policy that we don't reimburse for interest.
Yeah. So next steps, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority meets on October 27th. We'll review the final policy with them and be asking for them to adopt it at that time. There are 2 projects that are waiting in the wings to submit brownfield plans. And so I do anticipate that council will see some of those early next year.
So if you have concerns, now's the time to point them out. So any concerns she should hear about?
Well, I did have a you brought up like the Rapid, the taxes that they take with the Rapid and this community college and all that stuff. How does that work? I mean, do they not pay any of that, or how?
So what essentially happens is if I have a bucket of this money that I've collected, the revenue that I've collected, I would pay out 70% of that revenue to the developer to reimburse them for the expenses that we said that they're going to be reimbursed for. That remaining 30% plus the original property tax value would get split up as it normally would to all the different taxing jurisdictions. So just as they are normally paid out, they would be paid out with that proportion.
Okay, gotcha. Like our dollar bill, how it
Yes.
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 Yep.
what Jody does. Okay.
So we would keep, 32% of that? I think our share is
Yeah.
roughly that.
I
And then
think so.
it would go out to each taxing jurisdiction in that proportion.
Okay.
Everyone good? Okay, I think you get to stay at the mic. Next item on the agenda is the proposed R2 and R3 zoning amendments.
Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about R2 and R3 zone district solutions. I'm going to preface this by saying that whenever we talk about changes to our zoning code, we always want to look at our master plan for guidance and determine if the changes that we're making are aligning with that document, because that's always our intent, to bring all of our zone districts and all of our policies into alignment with that. That's the document that both Planning Commission and City Council ultimately approve, and that's the guiding document that we work off of. So when we look at our master plan, there are three things that we've highlighted: enhance existing neighborhoods. We do this through supporting continued reinvestment into existing neighborhoods to improve overall housing stock quality and community character. Accommodate home expansion, allowing people to facilitate reinvestment back into neighborhoods, and encourage alternative housing types. And so when we talk about those three goals, which are outlined from our master plan, we also look at, well, what are the things that are preventing those from happening? And in Wyoming, there is a big gap in our R2 and our R3 districts in minimum lot sizes. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. I want to remind everyone that tonight we're only talking about our R2 and our R3 districts. We have multiple residential districts within our community, but for the sake of this evening, we're only focusing on R2 and R3. When we look at those districts, we have roughly 15, 16,000 of them. About 63% of them, or 9,300 of them, do not meet minimum lot size requirements. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and why that's so important and why that's preventing some of the goals on the master plan side previously from being able to be realized. So like I said, 63% of our R2 and our R3 residential parcels are not conforming and do not meet lot size minimums. So what does a non-conformity do? So when I say that a parcel is non-conforming, what does that actually mean, and what's the impact on our residents? What a non-conformity does is it prevents or it limits a property owner from building additions to their homes, building accessory structures, possibly putting in a driveway, adjusting boundary lines, petitioning for lot splits, renovating existing structures. So it's a real limiting factor as to what a homeowner is able to do with their property. And 63% of the properties in our R2 and R3 districts are realizing this limitation. So unless changes are made to adjust the zoning code, new housing will not match existing neighborhood character and will continue to constrain investment in an existing structure. So we talk a lot in planning and here at council about wanting to retain community and neighborhood character. And so when we think about a lot of the proposals that we're going to be talking about, not only tonight, but in the future, because this is a multi-step process, one of the goals is making sure that we can keep our neighborhoods looking the same and continue to have that same character and aesthetic that they've always had. So let's think about what it actually means when you have a nonconformity. So on the screen in front of you, you have an example parcel. Our zoning code says that in an R2 parcel, you have to have a minimum of 65 feet of width and 8,400 square feet of lot area. A non-conforming lot and a common lot in Wyoming might have 50 feet of frontage as opposed to that full 65 and only 5,000 square feet. So when you look at R2 and R3 lot width and area conformity, all of the green on that map is conforming R2 and R3 parcels. All of the red is non-conforming, except I'm gonna put on that layer. That's all of our parks, our schools, our utility districts. So when you look at the amount of residential nonconformity, you can see the amount of red on that screen. So you're probably asking, how did we get here? How did we get this much red on our map? Well, we're going to talk about that. So let's look at an example for R3 lot conformity. In the R3 district, 90% of the lots are non-conforming, which is why you see that amount of red on this map. Remember, we don't have very many R3 parcels in our community, but 90% of them are non-conforming. So we're going to look specifically at this area off of Division Avenue. Before I hop into that, I want everyone to keep in mind that in R3, the minimum lot area is 12,000 square foot, and the minimum lot width is 100 feet. So now we're going to have a history lesson. This is a plat from 1918. It's a plat off of Division Avenue. And when you're looking at this plat, you're probably thinking, gosh, Nicole, I don't think any of those parcels look like they're 100 feet wide. Well, you would be correct. Not a single parcel on there is 100 feet wide. In fact, none of the parcels shown in this plat even meet our R2 standard with 65-foot lots. So in 1918, when this was platted, the majority of the parcels in this plat were between 45 and 54 feet. There were a handful at 35 to 44 feet and another handful at 55 to 64 feet. So today, these parcels are all not conforming. So after we looked at that, we then explored roughly 300 more plats in Wyoming. If any of you history buffs are interested, we have 591 overall plats in Wyoming. About 51% of them are before 1959, which is important, and we're going to talk about that. So we looked at all of our historic plats. Here's our pre-1900 plats. You can see them mostly isolated up in our northeastern corner adjacent to Grand Rapids. Then we start to grow 1900s through 1920s. You see more platting occurring up along Chicago Drive on the north side of our community. And then 1920 to 1940, we saw a lot of growth, most of that along Division Avenue, and then 36th Street started to see some expansion. 1940 to 1960, we're starting to fill in the different portions between 28th and 44th. Worth noting that City of Wyoming incorporates in 1959. So all of these plats are pre us becoming a city. Then 1960 to 1980, you start to see more swatches fill in. We continue to go. Now the Panhandle is really starting to fill in 1980 to 2000, 2000 to 2020, 2020 to present. So when we look at that, you have plats existing before the zoning code of 1959 on the left-hand side of your screen. And you have all plats on the right-hand side of your screen. So you can see most of our city was already platted prior to us becoming a city. And therefore, it shouldn't be surprising that our non-conforming R2 and R3 lots look very similar to the plats that existed prior to 1959, because the rules that we had in place didn't exist. As you saw on that plat from Division Avenue, most of those lots were coming in at 45 to 55 feet, not the current 65-foot wide standard. So we're now look at two ground level examples in Wyoming. One's an R2 example and one's an R3 example. So in our first example, of the 618 R2 parcels in this image, only 10% are conforming. We're going to talk specifically about this one located just south of Chicago Drive. This should look to you like it could be any house on the north side of our community. If you're walking along the street, everything about this seems and feels very similar. This is the character of this community on this side. But when you look at the existing compared to what's required, it's just a little over half the lot size at 4,800 square feet instead of 8,400. It's only 45 feet wide instead of the required 65 feet wide. It's got a front yard setback of 19 feet instead of what we require now, which is 35 feet. And it's got reduced side setbacks. I do want to mention that the reason the front yard setback is orange instead of red is because we have since 1959 put something in our code which allows for a house to average out what its neighbor front yards are. So if you have two houses and a blank parcel in the middle, that blank parcel in the middle can average out the front yard setbacks of the adjacent parcel. So even when we see redevelopment today, we are able to still match that existing development pattern for front yards, but not for many of these other features. And then this is what's also really important to talk about. And this is why reinvestment in a neighborhood is very hard right now. So if you look at this, if you put strictly on the front yard setback, the rear yard setback, the side yard setbacks, and you look at this, that blue box is where the house today would be allowed to be built. Notice that below that, you see the existing structure, which is not only bigger, it's in a different location. So it could not exist like that today. And if something like this were to be built today on a vacant parcel next to your house, it would feel really out of character. So now we're going to look at example 2, which is an R3 parcel. In this image, you'll see 152 R3 parcels, only 9% are conforming. Again, we're going to talk about this one. And again, this is another perfect example of a home in this neighborhood. Walking up and down this road, you would see many homes with this exact same characteristic. The detached garage, sitting closer to the street than the required 35 feet, or 35 feet, etc. So again, this parcel is about 7,200 square feet. It's required to be 12,000, so it's almost 3,000 square feet smaller than the minimum. It's only 60 feet wide as opposed to the R3 requirement of 100 feet. It's got a reduced front yard setback. It's 14 feet off of the sidewalk. Rear setback, and then side setbacks are also reduced. If you were to build a house here today, it would have to be built inside of this blue box, which again, maybe kind of looks close to the size of this structure, but it feels very different, especially when you look just to the north and you see another house that's aligned with where the existing structure is on this current parcel. So how do we fix this? How do we make it so that more residents have opportunities to invest in their neighborhoods or back into their parcels without having red tape or having to go for variances or other things? So our current standards for R2 and R3 are here. So minimum lot size is 8,400 for R2, 12,000 for R3, and then you can see all the different side yard setbacks and lot coverages. So one of the first things we did is we looked at, well, if we're trying to get to conformity, what size lots do we currently have in our community? So on the map in front of you, you see all the R2 and the R3 parcels. In that Notre Dame blue, you'll see the 40 and 50 foot wide lots, mostly on the north side of the community. And then in the central region, you'll see the 51, 65 feet. So we were looking to try to understand if we're going to be making a recommendation for a different minimum, how do we move the needle from 90% nonconformity in R3 and 60% in R2 to as close to 100% conformity as we can get. As part of our research, we also looked at what our neighboring communities are doing. So Grand Rapids has a minimum lot size in a comparable district of about 3,800 square feet. That shouldn't be surprising because Grand Rapids was incorporated as a city in 1850. And so if you look at where their parcels were platted in comparison to ours, they're all very similarly sized. But because their zoning code came in first and earlier, a lot of their parcels are conforming because they had those smaller dimensional standards up front. So we also looked at Granville and Kentwood. Kentwood having comparable sized parcels to us, though it developed a little bit later, and then Granville just having a slightly larger parcel. And so what we've been talking about internally and have talked to Planning Commission about at a high level is a recommended revision, which one, reduces the minimum lot width and size and along with required setbacks in the R2 and the R3 district, and then actually combines the R2 and the R3 districts. The amount of conformity in the R3 district at 90% provides that opportunity to merge it, simplify the code with the R2 district, and then just have one set of standards that applies to both of those districts, or really the new district. So, as I said, we did a lot of research to understand what are the current parcels out there and a lot of moving of the dime to figure out, okay, if we hit this standard, how much nonconformity do we have? If we hit this standard, how much nonconformity do we have, et cetera. The proposal in front of you is for a 4,000 square foot minimum lot size, 40 foot minimum lot width, front yard setback of 15, rear setback of 25, side yard setbacks combined of 14 with an individual of 5, and then we're raising the max lot coverage slightly. So again, this is just a preliminary conversation. We still have to discuss this more with Planning Commission, but this proposal would take us to almost 100% of parcels being conforming in Wyoming. So when we talk about the ability of residents to make reinvestments back into their parcels, what we're trying to do is reduce that nonconformity to prevent them from being able to make that change. By implementing those recommendations for a reduced minimum lot width and size along with required setbacks, we're really just going back to the historical building pattern in Wyoming. We're just recognizing it for what it is. And then we're combining the R2 and the R3 zone districts for simplicity. What that ultimately achieves is that 99.6% of parcels would be conforming. And you can see that in the examples that we talked about earlier. Here's example 1. Previously, it was 10% conforming. Now it's 99% conforming. There was our example 1. You can see that in doing that, all of those letters or numbers which were red before are now in the green because they're now conforming. The existing building envelope would now look like this, which fits this house and looks more in character with what you see in the rest of the community. In our second example, which was for the R3 district, you'll note the previous conformity in this area was 9%. The new conformity would be 99%. That was the parcel we looked at. Note that all of those have transitioned to green except for that front yard setback. It's still sitting a little bit closer to the street. That becomes the new building envelope, which is enough to fit the house and allow for even a slightly larger house or a future expansion of that house, where previously that owner wouldn't have had that opportunity to do that. So the end result is that it maintains the character of our existing neighborhoods, enables reinvestment in historic homes, increases the conformity of over 9,000 parcels in our R2 and R3 districts, and reduces housing costs in Wyoming. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is really a multi-step process. So tonight we're here talking about how we would initially bring our R2 and R3 parcels into conformity. And then there are additional changes that we'll talk about at the next work session that would relate to the R2 and the R3 districts. So if you have any questions about this, I'm happy to dive in.
So just a general, make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. So the R2 and R3 essentially are those that are in the pre-Wyoming.
Correct.
Becoming a city, right? Mm-hmm. Pre-1959. And then so you have those districts, and then you have your panhandle area right now that a lot of those were developed well after that. And so mm-hmm. they're still R1.
Correct.
And so those wouldn't be modified at all. It's just the R2s and R3s combining into one R.
Correct. The only districts that this proposal would touch are R2 and R3.
Okay.
Other questions?
In the interest of fairness to those handful that were still red, if they were to apply for some kind of zoning variance, would they probably, without getting rubber stamped, they would be strongly ushered through?
Yeah, I would say when you have 99.6% conformity, that 0.4% would have a pretty compelling reason to say that they're unique enough to then meet some of those thresholds that the board would establish.
Okay.
And how is it going to reduce housing costs in Wyoming?
Well, what it does is it allows for reinvestment into your existing home. So, for example, right now, if you'll recall earlier when we looked at this slide, the home was completely within the box. There was no room for expansion. Now you can actually build an expansion. And so what that comes back to, let me hop around here, If you recall in the table, one thing that I noticed but didn't spend too much time talking about is that max lot coverage. So it also moves the max lot coverage just slightly so that, and we'll talk about this more in November. We have some really great graphics to show what this would look like, but that would basically allow for like someone to put a 1-bedroom expansion onto their home. So maybe it's a couple that had a kid and now they're wanting to stay in their community, but they have another kid on the way. So that allows them to just do a mild expansion. It's way cheaper than going out and buying a new house. They can reinvest back into the neighborhood, and now they'd have that ability to do it, where before it was a non-conforming parcel. So not only would they not have been allowed to make that expansion, they also would have violated additional minimums by asking to do so. So they would have had to go through the variance process, and there wouldn't have been a good reason to grant that variance based on the very strict legal structure that we have built for variances.
Gotcha.
Other questions? Sheldon?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. So R3 is essentially a duplex lot, correct?
R3 does allow duplexes, yes, but
So if we change these all to the same thing, are we going to create duplex lots?
so you are jumping into November's discussion, but I will tell you that we did research there too, and you would be surprised at the number of duplexes in R2s because they were at one point in time permitted. And so there's actually a high number of duplexes already in our R2 districts.
But are we going to create more duplex lots?
So we would create the opportunity potentially for a duplex to exist in this new R2, R3 combined lot, but it would still have to meet the minimum lot requirements, which we're actually proposing would be different than this minimum standard here. So if you did want to have a duplex, we have a slightly different set of standards you would have to meet.
And we're going to talk about this in November?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? I guess I would share too, that was my one concern, because the only difference I see other than the dimensions is duplex between the two lots.
Yeah.
Or zoning districts, so.
So in November, we'll talk about that and prepare to provide all of the data and the rationale behind it. There are other things too that we'll talk about. For example, we require that all new builds have attached garages. But you'll see when we talk about what exists in R2 and R3 districts, the vast majority have detached garages. So there are a handful of other components that have to be cleaned up if we were to go this route, because if we don't do it correctly the first time, we'll just continue to create a nonconformity challenge in the future.
Yeah, and my only other concern is the five-foot setback is, I just want to make sure that you got this past the fire department and building inspections. You're getting, kind of tight fire code wise, I think. So I think you can do it with 10 feet, but.
So yes, we have included all of our partners in this conversation, and this combination would be something that all would be comfortable with moving forward.
Other questions? Thank you. Any other matters, John?
No.
Acknowledgement of visitors. If you're here and you would like to speak to council, now's your opportunity to step to the mic. Seeing none, for the good of the order, I'll go around the dais. We'll start with Rob. Sheldon? Renee?
Not tonight.
Kyle? Marissa?
Sorry.
Wow. Everybody wants to go home, I think. So, but it was a very informative meeting. So I think we covered a lot of ground and had some good information. Meeting adjourned.